Welcome to Parenti Stuff, the podcast. I am your host, Lumpy Louise, and this is the read and discuss of Democracy for the Few, 9th edition. Chapter 4, Wealth and Want in the United States. So I am Lumpy Louise, and I have been doing this. This is the fourth live I'm doing on Democracy for the Few. I am going through I'm doing a read and a discuss. So we read through part of the chapter and I do a little discussion. At the end, I invite anyone who wants to come up and do a discussion, or if you have any questions from the audience, I will try to answer them then, or I might, have to answer them the next time I come back because I want to look into some stuff. And that is what I'm actually going to open up with today is a question that someone asked me last Thursday, on chapter 3. We were talking about, how it was the last section was about the New Deal. And, so when we were talking about the New Deal, it got brought up like the New Deal kind of served the capitalists. So it was just kind of a broad statement in what, Parenti said. And I'm just, I use the broad terms that we normally use. So I just want to give more detail on that. I'm going to give you guys some stuff that you can go and read if you want, or, so I don't know. Here we go. So, first of all, I wanted to say there is some theory to read on reform, because we're talking about social reforms, the New Deal. This is not directly, of course, about the New Deal, but you can always read Rosa Luxemburg on Reform or Revolution, which really was probably one of the first ones I read about reform. There's a small Lenin piece that's really good. And it's really short. It's called Marxism and Reformism. And it will tell you how reforming capitalism it doesn't work. It doesn't work for the people. It always ends up working for the capitalists. And both of those can be found on Marxist.org. So I usually use Marxist.org and archive.org for most of the stuff I do. And I like to say, on the archive.org, Parenti has over 20 books written. There's probably a good 15 of them, at least, up on there, including his first book he wrote, which is The Anti-Communist Impulse, which at some point I want to go through with everyone too. Especially with the rise in anti-communism right now. So that would be good. So, those are two things you can look at if you're interested in why reform is bad. But I looked it up, what Parenti, the source that Parenti was using when he made that statement. And the source, which I found on archive.org, is it's an essay called The New Deal, The Conservative Achievements of Liberal Reform by Barton J. Bernstein. And I found it on the archive published in an essay collection called Towards a New Past, Dissenting Essays in American History. And it was published in 1969. So this was just an essay. And he gets into a lot of detail, which I'll summarize I'll summarize a little bit of it, but I just wanted to read this, one part of this paragraph too. The liberal reforms of the New Deal did not transform the American system. They conserved and protected American corporate capitalism, occasionally by absorbing parts of threatening programs. There was no significant redistribution of power in the American society, only limited recognition of other organized groups, seldom of unorganized peoples. Neither the bolder programs advanced by New Dealers nor the final legislation greatly extended the beneficence of government beyond the middle classes or drew upon the wealth of the few for the needs of the many. Designed to maintain the American system, liberal activity was directed towards essentially conservative goals. Experimentalism was not frequently limited to means. Seldom did it extend to ends. Never questioning private enterprise, it operated within safe channels, far short of Marxism or even of Native American radicalisms that offered structural critiques and structural solutions. Okay, so Bernstein continues on to break down just how the policies helped or were soon discarded in benefits to the capitalists. So not so much the programs being bad, it was the implementations and then the stoppage of the good programs to serve the capitalists that failed it from doing much more for the people. It didn't reach the people most in need unless they were like under an organization or an organization was recognizing them. So they had, they needed the support of an organization to actually get a lot of these programs. The corporations absorbing the programs reminds me of the highway cleanup programs corporations do, where they own part of the highway and send employees down a couple times a year to clean up the stretch. This is something that could easily be a public works job for people who are out of work. Like we could pay them for doing public works, but rather it is done by people already employed in yet another form of privatization, or they use the cleanups as punishment for breaking certain nonviolent laws. Bernstein is looking back to the new program a few decades later and saying, look, none of that actually helped anything but capitalism. Think on how people looked back a few decades after Reaganomics and how it was praised by so many while it was first implemented, but hurt people in the long run. The New Deal never solved any of the problems capitalism caused, but it helped it through yet another crisis of capitalism. Hello, everyone joining. Hello. Hey, Ash. Thank you, Ash. So right here, like whenever I talk about this stuff, I feel the need that I have to bring up Otto von Bismarck. Because he was like basically, as capitalism was being, more and more implemented and, we are in our Gilded Age. He's like coming up there too. And he's ruling the Weimar Republic, Germany or whatever. He put an anti-socialist act out in 1878, which didn't solve the problem. So, just a few years later, he implemented this huge, yes, Mando, you have to do more reading on Parenti. Sorry, I just saw that. So Otto von Bismarck did this, this kind of like a New Deal. I mean, he did this whole thing and he even there's remarks out there that he was saying yeah, we just need to placate them. We need to shut them up. So we're just going to give them a few things, that will make the socialists just go away. And at that time, the socialist, socialism and communism is the same thing. They're using them interchangeably at that time too, which I use them interchangeably too, but not everyone does. All right. So we also can look back to the first crises of capitalism in this country, which was the Panic of 1819. After the War of 1812, there was a boom with the rapid economic expansion, especially in land and cotton. We were pushing more and more indigenous people off the land. And also the cotton was enriching the southern plantations, but also the northern textile industries, just to note. So the bank decided to issue paper money that had no backing of gold to it. It's kind of like the fiat system we got now, but with protections. So we had moved away from the gold standard that we used, soon after this, we did the gold standard, or not soon after, a few decades after this, but we held on to the gold standard, but then we realized how limiting it was for us to ever become a superpower. We needed to have a fiat system that we could print the money when we, pretty much when we needed it. Not for the people, but, for other things. Then the Second National Bank. So this is the Second National Bank had just opened up. We only have the First National going on. Now the Second National comes to play, and the First National was like, hey, I'll give you all loans. We don't care. But the Second National was like, they're a bit more conservative, and Then they tightened credit to curb speculation, which was a huge contradiction. So people pulled out of the banks, making them fail, which made businesses fail, which led to unemployment, especially in larger cities. Farmers and homeowners were foreclosed on, and if you couldn't pay your debts, you were sent to jail. Hey, holy water. I don't know why I say holly. Holy water. Hello, everyone. Okay. So this all brought us, this is what split the Jeffersonian democracy, and this is what gave us Jackson. So in the Joel Bakken book, The Corporation, the Pathological Pursuit of Profit and Power, and I popped my P's, so I'm sorry. Bakken tells you how corporations went from being outlawed in England in the early 18th century with the Bubble Act because they were used as a swindle more so than actually making the investors money. And in colonial America, there was a very low number. So there was like 33 corporations going into the Constitution writing. And then soon after, like within 10 years, it was like 380 or something like that. Like there was well over 300 corporations. So, they started allowing them more and more. So the corporations having control over every part of our lives within 100 years. So they went from being outlawed in England and then just becoming this beast, And in the mid to late 19th century, the railroads are what established corporations' usefulness to the capitalist. In the beginning, corporations were limited and had limited powers, but within decades of the founding of the United States, they ruled with very little holding them back. Back in the day, there were time limits put on corporations, like they normally did not exceed 30 years, and that went away too. Now we have corporations that have been around for, going on 200 years now. Okay, so the railroads were a big money grab, job. So they needed to extend the time limits, so they just ended up getting rid of them. There was some grand ideas of allowing the common man to invest, which they did, and his few dollars as well. But in what the capitalists claimed would help people feel more confident to do this, they came up with limited liability, so the investor, no matter how big or small, was protected from his personal property being taken away from him in a lawsuit against the corporation. This protected the big guy much more, who now could take more risks with other people's money. When you know that you'll land on your feet because you have money to burn, so what if a bunch of that money comes from the few pennies a bunch of small investors could pull together in a gamble for a more secure future? So, hello, everyone. All right. Bakken also lays out how corporations became people, and to be honest, before reading the book, I didn't realize that history went back as far as it did. Mostly because I never thought of the question of when it all started, but it looks like pretty much to the Gilded Age, but definitely established fact by the progressive era of the first couple decades of the 20th century. But of course, that pretty much always had that status. So they always, like, corporations had this status of being a person. That's not something new that's been around through all this. Okay, so now I can get into chapter 4. Chapter 4 is entitled Wealth and Want in the United States, and Parenti takes a closer look at capitalism itself, in particular, the corporate capitalism and the impact on social and political life. To do this, he first explains what a capitalist is, or rather, the owning class. And though considered part of the owning class, Parenti takes pity on small business. Parenti uses the phrase squirrels dancing among elephants to describe the mom and pop shops that are trampled by the corporate owning class. This in itself shows how a free market in a competitive system was never going to do anything but create monopolies. When you reward greed, greed wins every time. All right, so let's get to listening to this.
Wealth and Want. In the United States, most people who write about the US political system never mention corporate capitalism. But the capitalist economy has an overbearing impact upon political and social life. It deserves our attention. Capital and labor. One should distinguish between those who own the wealth of society and those who must work for a living. The very rich families and individuals who compose the owning class live mostly off investments, which include stocks, bonds, rents, mineral royalties, and other property income. Their employees live mostly off wages, salaries, and fees. The distinction between owners and employees is blurred somewhat by the range of incomes within both classes. Owners refer to both the fabulously wealthy stockholders of giant corporations and the struggling proprietors of small stores. But the latter hardly qualify as part of the corporate owning class. Among the victims of big business is small business itself. Small businesses are just so many squirrels dancing among the elephants. Every year over 30,000 of them get trampled and go out of business. Along with factory and service workers, the employee class also includes professionals and managers who in income, education, and lifestyle tend to be identified as middle or upper middle class. Company managers and executives are employees whose task is to extract more value, producing performance from other employees. Some top business executives, corporate lawyers, and entertainment and sports figures enjoy such huge incomes as to be able eventually to live off their investments, in effect becoming members of the owning class. You are a member of the owning class when your income is very large and comes mostly from the labor of other people, that is, when others work for you, either in a company you own, or by creating the wealth that allows your investments to give you a handsome return. The secret to great wealth is not to work hard but to have others work hard for you. This explains why workers who spend their lives toiling in factories or offices retire with relatively little if any funds to speak of, while the owners can amass considerable fortunes. Adam Smith, one of the founding theorists of capitalism, noted in 1776 that labor is alone the ultimate and real standard by which the value of all commodities can at all times and places be estimated and compared. It is their real price. Money is their nominal price only. What transforms a tree into a profitable commodity such as paper or furniture is the labor that goes into harvesting the timber, cutting the lumber, and manufacturing, shipping, advertising, and selling the finished product, along with the labor that goes into making the tools and whatever else is needed for production and distribution. Workers' wages represent only a portion of the wealth created by their labor. The average private sector employee works 2 hours for herself or himself and 6 or more hours for the boss. The portion that goes to the owner is what Marx called surplus value, the source of the owner's wealth. Capitalists themselves have a similar concept, value added in manufacture. In 2000, workers employed in manufacturing alone produced at least $1.64 trillion in value added, as reported by the U.S. Census Bureau, for which they were paid $363 billion in wages, or less than 1/4 of the market value created by their labor. Workers employed by Intel and Exxon received only about 1/9 of the value added, and in industries such as cigarettes and pharmaceuticals, the workers' share was a mere 1/20. In the last half-century, the overall average rate of value added in the United States more than doubled, far above the exploitation rate in other industrialized countries. Workers endure an exploitation of their labor as certainly as do slaves and serfs. The slave obviously toils for the enrichment of the master and receives only a bare subsistence in return. James Madison told a visitor shortly after the American Revolution that he made $257 a year on every slave he owned and spent only $12 or $13 for the slave's yearly keep. Slavery was a very profitable system. Serfs and sharecroppers, who must give much of their crop to the landowner and carry out other unpaid tasks for him, are also obviously exploited. Under capitalism, however, the portion taken from the worker is not visible. Workers are simply paid substantially less than the value they create. Indeed, the only reason they are hired is so the owner can make money off their labor. If wages did represent the total value created by labor, there would be no surplus value, no profits for the owner, no great fortunes for those who do not labor. The value distributed to the owners is apart from workers' wages or even executives' salaries. It consists of profits, the money one makes when not. Wealth and want in the United States. 29. Working. The author of a book, for instance, does not make profits on his book. He earns a recompense for the labor of writing it. Likewise, editors, proofreaders, printers, and salespersons all contribute labor that adds to the marketable value of the book. Profits on the book go to those who own the publishing house and who contribute nothing to the book's value. The sums going to owners are aptly called unearned income on tax reports. While corporations are often called producers, the truth is they produce nothing. They are organizational devices for the exploitation of labor and accumulation of capital. The real producers are those who apply their brawn, brains, and talents to the creation of goods and services. The primacy of labor was noted in 1861 by President Abraham Lincoln in his first annual message to Congress. Labor is prior to, and independent of, capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital, and deserves much the higher consideration. Lincoln's words went largely unheeded. Capitalists like to say they are putting their money to work, but money as such does not work. What they really mean is that they are using their money to put human labor to work, paying workers less in wages than they produce in sales. That's how money grows. Capital annexes living labor in order to convert itself into goods and services that will produce still more capital. All of Rockefeller's capital could not build a house or a machine or even a toothpick. Only human labor can do that. Of itself, capital cannot produce anything. It is the thing that is produced by labor. The ultimate purpose of a corporation is not to perform public services or produce goods as such, but to make as large a profit as possible for the investor. This relentless pursuit of profit arises from something more than just greed, although there is plenty of that. Under capitalism, enterprises must expand in order to survive. To stand still while competitors grow is to decline, not only relatively but absent into new markets, hold onto old ones, command investment capital, and control suppliers. So even the biggest corporations are beset by a ceaseless drive to expand, consolidate, and find new means of extracting profit from the market.
Okay. I use Speechify. We, when I was doing book club for Collective, we were doing popcorn reading, and we were getting into some text that had outdated language, and everyone's like, I don't know if I want to read that out loud. So Cutie came in with the Speechify, so I ended up just getting Speechify. So there are other readers out there. I haven't tried 11 Reader, but I've heard of that too. So, and was there anything else I needed to address? No. I think that was it. All right. So that was section 1, capital and labor. So he gets into some Marxist stuff here. So I'll start by saying there is a misconception that in communism, you are not allowed to own a thing. This is far from the truth. What communists are against is private property, the property that can be used to exploit other people to make you and your shareholders lots of money, also known as profit. Mom and pop shops are usually not vilified if you are just making money for yourself and not exploiting people. Parenti explains what the owning class is and what the employee class is. Some of those in the employee class can blend into the owning class because they make enough money to invest. They become traders to the employee class, also known as the working class, because they were privileged enough to catch a bulk of the crumbs the owning classes dropped. So there is not a clear-cut divide. Much of the middle class, what's left of it anyhow, is made up of the petite bourgeois, mom and pop shop owners, and then the horrible landlords, and the managing class. But one really sits at the bottom of the owning class and one sits at the top of the working class. The true owning class that we need to go after are the ones that make very large incomes from the labor of people. However, these two middle groups usually will choose self-interest over the people and, with the exceptions of a very few, will side with the owning class. Remember, the professional managing class came from the days of monopoly corporations, and much like the overseers on a plantation, break them from class consciousness because they are now in this mythical middle class, a step up from the masses and mob. I'm going to do a little bit of personal stuff through all this for examples. Just so you're gonna get some lumpy lore here, I guess. One of the more important things Parenti explains here is the importance of labor. Workers are needed to make any resource profitable, and it is the work they do that makes those profits. As machinery is introduced, it still needs workers to operate said machinery. Sure, the capitalist, with all his safety nets and how well he looks on paper, can easily get a loan for the machinery from the bank. But that money he has to make him look good on paper came from the workers who labored by hand for him or his family before him. He purchased that machinery either outright with the profit he and his family already stole from workers, or got a loan off the speculation of the work the workers will do in the future. As old Abe said, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and never could have existed if labor has not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much higher consideration. So that's even Abraham Lincoln said that. No, this came out weird. Okay. But let's look at how Engels viewed this from wage, labor, and capital. This is Engels. Let us take an example. For 1 shilling, a laborer works all day long in the fields of a farmer, to whom he thus secures a return of 2 shillings. The farmer not only receives the replaced value, the 1 shilling he had to pay the worker, which he has given to the day laborer, he has doubled it. Therefore, he has consumed the 1 shilling that he gave to the day laborer in a fruitful, productive manner. For the 1 shilling, he has brought the labor power of the day laborer. He bought the labor power of the day laborer, which creates products of the soil of twice the value. And out of the 1 shilling makes 2. The day laborer, on the contrary, receives in the place of his productive force, whose results he has just surrendered to the farmer, 1 shilling, which he exchanges for means of subsistence, which he consumes more or less quickly. The 1 shilling has therefore been consumed in a double manner, reproductively for the capitalist, for it has been exchanged for labor power, which brought forth 2 shillings unproductively for the worker. For it has been exchanged for means of subsistence, which are lost forever, and whose value he can obtain again only by repeating the same exchange with the farmer. Capital, therefore, presupposes wage labor. Wage labor presupposes capital. They condition each other. Each brings the other into existence. So basically, the worker is just working to survive, but the capitalist, in this case, the farm owner, has gotten a profit that can be used to buy more labor to make even more shillings. The farmer could now employ 2 workers and make a profit of 2 shillings, 1 shilling off each worker, or he could put that shilling into buying a machine that raises the yield of whatever he is planting even more, giving him more of a profit. The worker had to spend the 1 shilling he made to feed, clothe, house himself, with very little or nothing left over to take care of wants or unexpected expenses such as medical. So therefore, has nothing left to invest and move up to the status of the owning class. So he's stuck down there. So, all right. So let's listen to part 2.
Capital concentration. Who owns America? Contrary to a widely propagated myth, this country is not composed mostly of a broad affluent middle class. The top 1% own between 40 and 50% of the nation's total wealth, more than the combined wealth of the bottom 90%. True, about 40% of families own some stocks or bonds, but almost all of them have investments of less than $2,000. Taking into account their debts and mortgages, 90% of American families have little or no net assets. If you are not rich, it is because you lack the foresight to pick the right parents at birth. Studies show that, despite the well-publicized cases of self-made fortunes, rags to riches is a relatively rare exception. Most people die in the class to which they are born. The super-rich usually come from families that have inherited vast fortunes, and the poor usually stay poor, no matter how hard they toil. In fact, there is less upward social mobility today than a generation ago. The level of inequality in the United States is higher than in any other industrialized nation, and it continues to grow. In recent times, corporate profits have more than doubled. Income from investments has grown 2 to 3 times faster than income from work. In the last 20 years, the 500 largest U.S. industrial corporations more than doubled their assets, while eliminating over 5 million jobs. And the years that followed brought the highest level of corporate profits in the post-war era. U.S. Census Bureau income studies refer to the richest 20%, who earn 13 times more than the poorest 20%. But that greatly understates the real chasm between rich and poor. To be in the richest 20%, you need earn only $75,000 or so. In fact, the top 20% are not rich but mostly upper middle class. If you made $350,000 or more, you would be in the top 1%. Still, such an income does not represent great. The Duke and Duchess of AT&T, the Count and Countess of Citicorp, the Earl of Exxon, and the Marchioness of Avco, the Duke of Warnaco. Wealth and want in the United States. 31. Wealth. The real wealth is with the very top super-rich stratum, a tiny fraction of 1% of the population, some 145,000 individuals, who increased their aggregate income by almost 600% in the last 3 decades. The real income earned by the bottom 90% fell by 7%. As with income, so with wealth. In the 8 years from 2001 to 2008, the wealth of the richest 400 Americans had increased by nearly $700 billion for a grand total of $1.6 trillion, more than the bottom 50% combined. The gap between the super-rich and everyone else is even greater than these figures suggest. The Treasury Department says that the super-rich find ways, legal and illegal, to shelter much of their income from taxes. So much of their wealth is hidden away in secret accounts. In any case, the tiny top fraction that composes the super-rich is not 13 times but thousands of times richer than the poorest quintile. Few of the people who study income distribution seem to realize how rich the rich really are. Income and wealth disparities are greater than at any time over the previous 60 years. To paraphrase one economist, if we made an income pyramid out of children's blocks, with each layer representing $1,000 of income, over 99% of us would be at most 5 or 10 yards off the ground, while the peak for the very richest tiny fraction would be many times higher than Mount Everest. The 2008 Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans revealed that almost all were multibillionaires, with a combined total wealth of $1.57 trillion. Bill Gates of Microsoft remained the very richest, with $57 billion. Heirs of the Walton family, who make their money by paying poverty-level wages to their Walmart employees, occupied 4 of the top 10 spots on the Forbes list. Together the Waltons were worth $93 billion. The Forbes 400 list represents their active rich, those relatively newly involved in money-making. Left out of the picture is old money wealth, the Mellons, Morgans, Rockefellers, and others who operate through financial representatives. The power of this business class is like that of no other group in our society. The giant corporations control the rate of technological development and availability of livelihoods. They relegate whole communities to destitution when they export their industries overseas to cheaper labor markets. They devour environmental resources, stripping our forests and toxifying the land, water, and air, while creating conditions of scarcity for millions of people at home and abroad. A small number of giant corporations control most of the U.S. economy. The trend is toward ever greater concentrations as giant companies are swallowed up by supergiants in industries such as oil, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, media, health insurance, weapons manufacturing, and banking. Thus did Chase Manhattan devour manufacturers Hanover and Chemical Bank, only then to be acquired by J.P. Morgan. 3 years later, J.P. Morgan Chase bought up Bank One in a $58 billion deal that created the second largest U.S. banking company. Meanwhile, Verizon took over MCI for $6.7 billion, while Sprint and Nextel merged for $35 billion. Oil titans Exxon and Mobil merged, while Chevron took over Gulf and then consolidated with Texaco. The enormous sums expended on these acquisitions could be better spent on new technologies and production. Over the past 25 years, U.S. corporate giants spent only $2 trillion on research and development but $20 trillion on mergers and acquisitions, great expenditures of no real social value. Such mergers benefit the big shareholders, creditors, and top executives but leave consumers and small suppliers with fewer choices and higher prices. A company that is trying to acquire another company seldom has sufficient cash reserves, so it must borrow heavily from banks. A firm that wishes to ward off a hostile takeover by corporate raiders also has to procure large sums to buy a dominant share of its own stock. In either case, corporate consolidations lead to bigger corporate debts. To meet its debt obligations, the firm reduces wages and benefits, sells off productive plants for quick cash, lays off employees, and enforces speed-ups. Employees bear much of the brunt of merger mania. Thus, after merging with NationsBank, Bank of America reduced its workforce by 31,000. Sometimes the merged corporation moves to a cheaper labor market abroad, causing even more attrition for U.S. workers. Rich families like the DuPonts have controlling interests in giant corporations like General Motors, Coca-Cola, and United Brands. The DuPonts serve as trustees of dozens of colleges. They own about 40 manorial estates and private museums in Delaware alone and have set up 31 tax-exempt foundations. They frequently are the largest contributors to Republican presidential campaigns and right-wing causes. Another powerful financial empire, that of the Rockefellers, extends into just about every industry in every nation of the world. The Rockefellers control several of the world's largest oil companies and biggest banks. At one time or another, they or their close associates have occupied the offices of the president, vice president, top cabinet posts, the governorships of several states, and key positions in the Federal Reserve Board, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Council on Foreign Relations, and seats in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. Among the self-enriching individuals in the corporate world are the chief executive officers of giant companies. In 1973, CEOs earned about 30 to 40 times more than their workers. By 2009, they were making 317 times more. In 1 year, the nation's top 500 companies handed out $10.4 billion in stock options alone, mostly to their CEOs. The 10 highest-paid CEOs in 2008 pocketed from $72 million to $193 million in salaries, not counting millions more from various perks. CEOs enjoy a regal lifestyle that includes company jets, chauffeured cars, private retreats, free country club memberships, free box seats at major sporting and cultural events, and lavish pensions. General Electric CEO, Jack Welch, luxuriated in a $15 million New York apartment that the company maintained for him, along with free servants, food, wines, toiletries, and satellite TV at his four homes. As one editorialist rightly observed, other than the cost of a divorce lawyer, it is hard to imagine what Jack Welch has to pay for out of his own pocket. 13. Companies sometimes run at a loss, yet their top executives still richly reward themselves. American Airlines was brought to the edge of bankruptcy by its executives, who then voted themselves huge bonuses and millions in extra pension benefits. In the 2008-2009 recession, major Wall Street financial institutions were caught marketing trillions of dollars of inflated and worthless securities. Millions of employees lost the better part of their company pensions and life savings, yet the CEOs presiding over this crisis gave themselves multi-million-dollar bonuses. Still, it should be remembered that the average CEO collects only about 3 or 4% of a corporation's profits. The rest is distributed to its super-rich stockholders, those who do not work for it and who are vastly richer than the company's executive officers, as with the Waltons of Walmart.
Okay, all right. That was section 2, capital concentration, who owns America. Parenti's numbers are already way outdated from 15 years ago on a lot of the stuff. However, the percentages are pretty similar, but we do a disservice looking at the top 1%. Where the numbers get really funky is looking at how much 1/10 of the top of 1% make. And that is where a good portion of the country's wealth sits. That is about 340,000 people out of 340 million. Who hold about 15% of all the wealth in the United States. And I got to double check that number because I think it's even more than that. So right now, to be in the top 10%, you would need to be making about 150,000 a year. And according to Bank of America last fall, 1/5 of the households making 150,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. And once again, I don't know if I trust all these numbers. I'm telling you where I'm pulling them from, but I'm just pulling stats that I got when I looked them up. I could go on and give you more recent stats, but like I said, I don't know. I'd have to really research more. But instead, I want to read from an article written by Parenti in 2000. So I'm just going to read part of it. The article is actually up on his michaelparenti.org, I think it's called. He did a little blog for a little bit. So there's some articles up there if you're looking for more Parenti stuff to read, because we all should be reading more Parenti. No. 2 studies that do their best to... this is called, Super Rich Are Out of Sight. 2 studies that do their best to muddy our understanding of wealth, conducted respectively by the Rand Corporation and the Brookings Institute, and widely reported in the major media, found that individuals typically become rich not from inheritance, but by maintaining their health and working hard. Most of their savings come from their earnings and has nothing to do with inherited family wealth. The researchers would have us believe. in typical social science fashion, they prefigure your findings by limiting the scope of their data. Both studies fail to note that achieving a high income is in itself a large part due to inherited advantages. Those coming from upper strata households have a far better opportunity to maintain their health and develop their performance, attend superior schools, and achieve the advanced professional training, contacts, and influence needed to land the higher paying positions. Those are all privileges. More importantly, both the Rand and the Brookings studies fail to include the super rich, those who sit on immense and large inherited fortunes. Instead, the investigators concentrate on upper middle class professionals and managers, most of whom earn in the 100 to 300,000 range, which indicates that the researchers have no idea how rich the very rich really are. When pressed on this point, they explain that there is a shortage of data on the very rich. Being such a tiny percentage, they're an extremely difficult part of the population to survey, pleads Rand economist James P. Smith, offering the same excuse given by the Census Bureau officials. That Smith finds the super rich difficult to survey should not cause us to overlook the fact that their existence refutes his findings about self-earned wealth. He seems to admit as much when he says this should not be taken as a statement that the Rockefellers didn't give to their kids and the Kennedys didn't give to their kids. Indeed, most of the really big money is inherited, and by a portion of the population that is so minuscule as to be judged statistically inaccessible. And then the next paragraph is just more numbers, so I'm not going to throw those at you. But Marx predicted about the growing gap between rich and poor still haunts the land and the entire planet. The growing concentration of wealth creates still more poverty. As some few get even richer, more people fall deeper into destitution, finding it increasingly difficult to emerge from it. The same pattern holds throughout much of the world for years now, as the wealth of the few has been growing. The number of poor has been increasing at a faster rate than the Earth's population. A rising tide sinks many boats. To grasp the true extent of wealth and income inequality in the United States, we should stop treating the top quintile, the upper middle class, as the richest cohort in the country. But to do that, we need to look beyond the Census Bureau's cooked statistics. We need to catch sight of that tiny stratospheric apex that owns most of the world. So that was his article, The Super Rich Are Out of Sight. All right. What's going on here? I'm sorry. I'm looking at. Okay. All right. So let me. I'll look at the comments while I play number 3, section 3, downsizing and profiteering, and not get bogged down reading comments while we're live and being quiet. Okay.
Downsizing and profiteering. Corporations are hailed by some as great job providers. In fact, the top 200 transnational corporations account for more than a quarter of the world's economic activity while employing hardly 1/100% of the world's workforce. The capitalist seeks to raise profitability by downsizing, speed-ups, downgrading, and using more and more part-time and contract labor. Hundreds of thousands of better-paying manufacturing jobs have been eliminated, while some 80% of new jobs have been in low-paying clerical, retail, and temporary services. In recent downsizing, the ranks of managers and supervisors have been thinned but less so than workers' numbers. As a cost of production that cuts into profits, wages must be kept down. As a source of consumer spending, wages must be kept up. By holding down wages and reducing the workforce, employers diminish the buying power of the very public that buys their products, thereby creating a chronic tendency toward overproduction and recession. Recessions occur when workers are not paid enough to buy back the goods and services they produce. Demand cannot keep up with production. For the big capitalists, economic downturns are not unmitigated gloom. Smaller competitors are weeded out, unions are weakened and often broken, A reserve supply of unemployed workers helps to further depress wages, and profits rise faster than wages, at least for a while. The idea that all Americans are in the same boat, experiencing good and bad times together, should be put to rest. During recent recessions, corporate profits grew to record levels, as companies squeezed more output from each employee while paying less in wages and benefits. Former Secretary of the Treasury Nicholas Brady once remarked that recessions are not the end of the world and no big deal. Certainly not for Brady, who rested comfortably on a handsome fortune, and certainly not for his wealthy associates, who welcomed the opportunity to acquire bankrupted holdings at depressed prices. Brady and friends understood that the comfort and prosperity of the rich require an abundant supply of those who, spurred by the lash of necessity, tend the country club grounds, serve the banquet luncheons, work the mines, mills, fields, and offices, performing 100 thankless and sometimes health-damaging tasks for paltry wages. Wealth and poverty are not just juxtaposed, they are in a close dynamic relationship. Wealth creates poverty and relies on it for its own continued existence. Without slaves and serfs, how would the master and lord live in their style to which they were accustomed? Without the working poor, how would the leisurely rich make do? Were there no underprivileged, who would be privileged?
Okay, all right. I see a couple of things going on. I was going to bring up the Parenti and, where he's at. I mean, he's 91 years old. So he's been kind of retired. I think the last thing that I could find that he wrote and stuff was like 2018. And yeah, so I ask a question in here. We'll get to it. That, I wonder what he would think of and stuff like that. So yeah, I gotta be probably a little sad when I'm not a big person that like gets into like celebrity or anything like that. But, Parenti to me, he was the first book. This was the first book I read that was like theory-ish, that was actually using Marxism and stuff like that I know that I read when I was young. So, to me, he's, this is why I have an appreciation account for him. You know what I mean? Like he was there for that. And the 39th anniversary of Yellow Parenti, is it actually today? Because it sounds about right. April 15th? I should have looked at that. I have all the things saved with all the dates. So, yeah. All right. Happy birthday, Yellow Parenti. That was another thing with the yellow. Everyone gets. I put up all these other clips where he's not yellow, and they're like, "How come he's not yellow?" And I'm like, "See, you all need to read more Parenti. That just tells me right there that you do." Okay, so these next three sections are pretty short, and I'm not going to talk too much in between them. But this section just shows you how huge corporations never suffer and actually cause recessions, and they are comfortable enough to ride it through. And it is the workers who suffer the most. Wealth needs poverty to exist. If we change the mode of production from capitalism to communism, allowing the workers to be the ones who actually benefit from all their work, the wealthy feel they would suffer the same fates they impose on us. Whether they admit they know they caused this poverty, they for sure know they don't want it. All right, let's listen to number 4.
Inflation, the profit-price spiral. A common problem of modern capitalism is inflation. Even a modest annual inflation rate of 3 or 4% substantially reduces the buying power of wage earners and persons on fixed incomes over a few years' time. Corporate leaders maintain that inflation is caused by wage demands. Higher wages drive up production costs and must be passed on in higher prices. Generally, however, prices and profits have risen faster than wages. The 4 essentials, food, fuel, housing, and healthcare, which together devour 70% of the average family income, are the most inflationary of all. Yet the share going to labor in those 4 industries has been dropping. The high fuel and gas prices of recent years were not caused by oil workers or gas station attendants, who continue to earn about the same wages as before. Food prices are not driven higher by impoverished farm laborers or by minimum wage food servers at McDonald's. And the astronomical costs of healthcare cannot be blamed on the dismal wages paid to healthcare workers. How can wages be driving up prices when the portion of business earnings going to full-time workers in most industries has been shrinking, while the share going to executives, shareholders, and interest payments to bankers has risen dramatically? 16. The wage, price, inflation spiral is usually really a profit, price spiral, with the worker more the victim than the cause of inflation. As financial power is concentrated in fewer hands, prices are more easily manipulated. Instead of lowering prices when sales drop, the big monopoly firms often raise them to compensate for the decline, as happened with some companies in the 2009 recession. Prices also are pushed up by withholding distribution, as in 2005 when the petroleum cartels created artificial oil and gasoline scarcities that mysteriously disappeared after the companies jacked up their prices and reaped record profits. Massive military expenditures happen to be a particularly inflation-producing type of federal spending, admitted the Wall Street Journal years. Wealth and want in the United States 35 ago. The Civil War, the First and Second World Wars, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War all produced inflationary periods. Even during peacetime, huge defense outlays consume vast amounts of labor power and material resources, the military being the largest single consumer of fuel in the United States. Military spending creates jobs and consumer buying power while producing no additional goods and services. The resulting increase in buying power without a commensurate increase in consumer supply generates an upward pressure on prices.
Okay, so that was part 4, called Inflation and Profit Price Spiral. So basically there's about a 3%, we always call it the 3% price of living increase per year, which comes from inflation and other increases like housing and transportation, which is usually driven by inflation too. So let's just look at price of living, like most of it's like really inflation, okay? Just for the minute. Let's look at the last 3 years that I worked. I took a different position in my job that turned from hourly to salary. I made pretty much the same money though, because I worked a lot of OT in my hourly position, which was now taken from me. But I was promised that I wouldn't have to work over 40 hours, but that never happened. I worked actually probably longer hours when I was salary. So year 1, I made $55,000. Year 2, I should have gotten a raise to about $56,500. Year 3, I should have gotten up to just over $58,000. That didn't happen. In those 3 years, the profits of my corporation I worked for went up no less than 13.2% and as much as 32.4%. I got none of that during the time when I needed to break open my 401k to pay for my medical bills that were piling up from a disorder I got that mainly is pushed out due to stress. And none of this was stressing me. It still wouldn't have covered, but that wouldn't have covered it. But that extra money would have helped in that time. And me having to open my 401k caused other issues, you know. And we'll get into 401ks in a little bit. Anywho, I had much less buying power the 3rd year in and had to start tightening my belt even more as time went by. Things were out of my price range. Now times up by millions of other workers not having the money to buy things. And that's what happens, you know? So the inflation, so this is causing more inflation because they're not buying the things. So the inflation is the profits, is in the profits. And this was no more evident at any time than what happened during the pandemic. The liberal economists will tell you it's super hard to figure out how profit ties to inflation, but it really isn't. It may never be the full cause, but it is always one of the bigger ones, the much bigger cause. Those are terrible raises. Yeah. It's 3% is, I don't know. I mean, that's supposedly the living wage and it never is. It seems like it fluctuates through the years and it's usually a little bit more now. I think every year the living wage, should be changing, but no one ever freaking looks at it. Okay. Let's listen to number 5.
Monopoly farming. Most of our food supply and farmlands are dominated by a handful of agribusiness firms that control 80% of the food industry's assets and close to 90% of the profits. An agribusiness is a giant corporation that specializes in large-scale commercial farming, with a heavy reliance on monoculture crops, pesticides, herbicides, and government subsidies. Agribusiness megacorporations control every stage of food production, from gene splicing in the laboratory to retail sales in the supermarket. Independent family farms are being driven out of business because the price that agribusiness distributors pay them for their perishable crops is often below the costs they must pay for corporate-controlled machinery, seeds, and fertilizers. Today, the combined farm debt is much greater than net family farm income. Only 2 or 3% of the price on a farm commodity goes to the farmer. Most of the rest goes to the corporate distributors. Of the 2.2 million remaining farms, about 45% survive by finding additional work off the farm. Contrary to popular belief, large commercial agribusiness farms do not produce more efficiently than small farms. Agribusiness mass production techniques damage topsoil, cause enormous waste runoffs, and produce heavily chemicalized crops and livestock. An estimated 70% of the antibiotics used in this country are fed to factory farm animals as a regular feed supplement to increase their weight. And because the animals are crowded by the thousands in inhumane and unhealthy quarters, the medications are used to lessen the chance of infection. But the buildup of antibiotics in the food chain is putting both humans and animals increasingly at risk as drug-resistant diseases quickly develop. The shift from family farm to corporate agribusiness has brought numerous diseconomies. The family farm uses less pesticides and herbicides, does not voluntarily resort to genetic engineering, and is concerned about farm waste disposal and preserving the cleanliness of its groundwater, which it uses for its own living purposes. Family farms treat their animals in a healthier and more humane way, injecting less antibiotics and hormones in livestock. They are also more economical in their use of fuel and topsoil, and by providing primarily for local markets, they have lower transportation costs. With the growth of corporate agribusiness, regional self-sufficiency in food has virtually vanished. The Northeast United States, for instance, imports more than 70% of its food from other regions. For every $2 spent growing food in the United States, another $1 is spent transporting it. Giant agribusiness farms rely on intensive row crop planting and heavy use of toxic spraying and artificial fertilizers, causing millions of acres of topsoil to be blown away each year. The nation's ability to feed itself is being jeopardized, as more and more land is eroded or toxified by large-scale, quick-profit, biotech farming, not to mention the damage to people's health resulting from consuming foods produced by chemicalized methods. On the big agribusiness farms, the plight of the nation's 2 million farm laborers has gone from bad to worse. Some are forced to work off the clock, that is, without pay, for several hours each day. The pesticides and herbicides they are exposed to and their poor living conditions constitute serious health hazards. And farm laborers are among the lowest paid workers in the country. Much of the food we eat today contains genetically modified ingredients, created by big biotech companies like Monsanto. The long-term effects of such frankenfood on our health are unknown. The agribusiness firms control not only the marketing of these dubious products but most of the research concerning their effects on our health and environment. Our freedom to choose organically grown natural foods is becoming increasingly difficult to exercise. The Food and Drug Administration failed to require safety testing of GM foods, and has refused to impose mandatory labeling, thereby preventing consumers from knowing what foods are potentially unsafe biotech products. GM soy crops were supposed to bring higher yields at lower costs. They were bred with a special gene, making them resistant to Monsanto's powerful Roundup herbicide that kills everything else that grows. Yet the GM crops produced lower yields and have eventually needed just as much pesticide application as conventional crops. The irony is that this costly research is not needed. Farmers in developing countries are already growing crop varieties with most of the traits, such as drought tolerance and insect resistance, that gene engineers are dreaming of. Farmers in most regions can produce plenty to feed their own communities and cities. 25 genetic modification is an expensive, profit-driven solution looking for a problem. So are the notorious Terminator seeds, which raise barren crops, thereby preventing farmers from planting anew with seeds from their own crops. Instead, the farmers have to buy a new supply of GM Terminator seeds every year, creating more dependency and expense for themselves but bigger profits for Monsanto and other firms. The resulting genetic uniformity wipes out natural diversity, making crops still more vulnerable to disease and pests. This increases the need for pesticides and herbicides beyond what is used on conventional crops. These pesticides are manufactured by Monsanto and other companies that also make the Terminator seeds. Small farmers have had their crops contaminated by genetically modified pollen drifting over from distantly located agribusiness lands. These farmers then have been successfully sued and bankrupted by Monsanto because some small portion of their crop contained GM plants and therefore constituted an infringement of the corporation's property rights. The farmers are then usually driven out of business by the legal actions taken by Monsanto or Cargill or other profit-driven giant firms. The Terminator technology has been universally condemned by agricultural research institutes and United Nations agencies, as bad for farmers, harmful to the environment, and disastrous for world food security. By spreading genetically modified strains at home and abroad, companies like Monsanto undermine the rich varieties of local crops, wipe out millions of small and efficient farms that perform well in this and other countries, and move ever closer to monopolizing the world's food production.
Today we are learning capitalism bad. No. All right, so what was going on here? Yes, Rick, yeah, like the 3%. I always just use the 3% because it did, like, when I first started working, it was actually beating inflation at that time, but it really doesn't now, and people don't really get a 3% raise every year as they used to. And proletariat, yes, we do have to pay to eat foods not genetically modified. We're literally paying to make ourselves sick, yes. So anyhow, this was monopoly farming. This is section 5. It is said that the farmland is 98% of the hands of the individuals and families, but that doesn't give you the proper picture. That's what they claim in the United States, that 98% of the farms are in this. What if I told you one of those individuals was Bill Gates, and that the tech guy is the largest private farmland owner in the United States, with him owning 270,000 acres spread over 18 states. And that is 1% of all U.S. farmland in the hands of one individual. A good chunk of the farmland in the United States is owned by non-operating landowners, of which Gates falls into. These landowners rent out the land for farmers to work. So it's a little skewed saying that 98% are in the hands of individuals and families. I just want to gripe for a minute about Monsanto. I see proletariats there with me about griping about Monsanto. So Monsanto just pisses me off. Okay, so I know I mentioned earlier that my lymphatic disorder is brought out by stressors, and I had a few key events that set off the disorder. I personally know a doctor that is researching the disorder along with other lymphatic conditions. My disorder was considered, its Latin term is adiposis dolorosa. It was called painful fat. Adipose is fat, dolorosa is painful. They always thought it was a fat disorder because what happens is I get lipomas, hence the lumpy, in my subcutaneous fat layer, which is, you don't really see them sticking out of my skin or anything like that much. They're very small, but I get hundreds of them all throughout my body. Some are really tiny, like little grains of rice, and some are I don't get really big ones. I only have a couple that are a little bit big, but most of my big ones are like pea size, but I have one that's probably like a walnut, kind of flattened. I don't know. I don't want to talk about my lumps. Sorry. My lovely lady lumps, I guess. I don't know. So I personally know a doctor that is researching this. So she has kind of found out, like, she has found the gene, but they haven't like accepted that yet. So only 10 years ago is when they figured out it was actually a lymphatic condition, not a fat condition. So basically your lymphatic, they haven't studied the lymph very much, so they don't know a lot about it. They do know, however, it acts like a trash collector. So it runs throughout your body, picking up toxins and then drops them off into your gut. And then, your gut does its thing and it's processed and flushed out with everything else that gets put into your gut. The more toxins you put into your system, the more work your lymphatic system has to do. And this is for everyone. This isn't just for people that have, a faulty lymphatic system. That's what they call it, a faulty, because it just starts getting slower and slower working. Because a lot, like, you don't really have children that have Derkums. Like, it comes out later in life because it's pushed out in this way and it's all stress. But it's also the toxins that you're putting in there because your lymphatic system has to keep cleaning that stuff out. So that is why Monsanto has been like, and it was so funny because like everyone's like, oh, what are you talking about? It's totally fine. I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I can't eat this crap. Like, it makes me sick in the way overall, but it makes me sick even when I like, sometimes when I just eat it. Like, it just makes me sick to my stomach when I'm eating it. So what was I saying here? The more toxins you put in your system, the more work your lymphatic system has to do. And it has to do with that without a regulator. Like the heart is your circulatory system regulator. Your lungs are your respiratory system regulator. The lymph doesn't have one. So it just slows down over time because the more you have to use it, the slower it will get. So people will get older. They might get a lump or two because of that too. But, it doesn't mean you have darkums, but, you're hurting your lymphatic system. So everyone look at lymphatic health if you can. So people were just not made to eat unnatural things. All right, let me play number 6. Hold on.
Market demand and productivity. Those who say that private enterprise can answer our needs overlook the fact that private enterprise has no such intention, its function being to produce the biggest profits possible. People may need food, but they offer no market until their need is coupled with buying power to become a market demand. When asked what they were doing about the widespread hunger in the United States, one food manufacturer responded with refreshing candor, "If we saw evidence of profitability, we might look into this." 29. The difference between need and demand shows up on the international market also. When the free market, rather than human need, determines how resources are used, poor nations feed rich ones. Beef, fish, and other protein products from Peru, Mexico, Panama, India, and other third world countries find their way to profitable U.S. markets rather than being used to feed the hungry children in those countries. The children need food, but they lack the money, hence, there is no demand. The free market is anything but free. Money is invested only where money is to be made. Under capitalism, there is a glut of non-essential goods and services for those with money and a shortage of essential ones for those without money. Stores groan with unsold items while millions of people are ill-housed and ill-fed. The human value of productivity rests in its social purpose. Is the purpose to plunder the land without regard to ecological needs, fabricate endless consumer desires, produce expensive goods like automobiles, pander to snobism and acquisitiveness, squeeze as much toil as possible out of workers while paying them as little as possible, create artificial scarcities in order to jack up prices, all in order to grab ever bigger profits for the few? Or is productivity geared to satisfying essential communal needs first and superfluous desires last, caring for the natural environment, the public's health and well-being, housing, educational opportunities, and cultural life? Capitalist productivity for profit gives little consideration to the latter set of goals. Capitalism's defenders claim that corporate productivity creates prosperity for all. But productivity is a mixed blessing. The coal mining companies in Appalachia are highly productive and profitable while creating much misery, swindling the Appalachians out of their land, forcing them to work under dangerous conditions, destroying their countryside with strip mining and mountaintop removal, and refusing to pay any of the resulting social costs. In the last 3 decades, worker productivity rose a dramatic 75%, while full-time real wages stagnated or declined in some industries, so that real wages were lower in 2009 than in 1973. If the minimum wage had risen at the same pace as productivity, it would be over $14 an hour instead of $7.25. Most profits from increased productivity go to the firm's investors and top officers. An increase in productivity, as measured by the gross domestic product, the total cost of all goods and services in a given year, is no sure measure of society's well-being. Important non-market services like housework and child-rearing go uncounted, while many things of negative social value are included in the GDP. Thus, crime and highway accidents, which lead to increased insurance, hospital, and police costs, add quite a bit to the GDP but take a lot out of life. What is called productivity, as measured quantitatively, may sometimes represent a deterioration in the quality of life. It is argued that the accumulation of great fortunes is a necessary condition for economic growth, for only the wealthy can provide the huge sums needed for the capitalization of new enterprises. Yet in many industries, be it railroads, aeronautics, nuclear energy, communications, or computers, much of the initial funding for research and development came from the government. It is one thing to say that large-scale production requires capital accumulation, but something else to presume that the source of accumulation must be the purses of the rich. Giant corporations leave much of the pioneering research to smaller businesses and individual entrepreneurs. The inventiveness record of the biggest oil companies is strikingly undistinguished. Referring to electric appliances, one General Electric vice president noted, I know of no original product invention, not even electric shavers or heating pads, made by any of the giant laboratories or corporations. The record of the giants is one of moving in, buying out, and absorbing the small creators. 31 The same can be said of recent advances in the software industry. Defenders of the free market claim that big production units are needed for the modern age. However, bigness is less the result of technological necessity and more the outcome of profit-driven acquisitions and mergers, as when the same corporation has holdings in manufacturing, insurance, utilities, amusement parks, broadcast media, and publishing. When times are good, the capitalists sing praise to the wonders of their free market system. When times are bad, they blame labor and government for capitalism's ills. Workers must learn to toil harder for less in order to stay competitive in the global economy, they say, then business would not move to cheaper labor markets in third world countries. For labor it is a race to the bottom. Workers who do take wage and benefit cuts, in order to remain competitive, often end up seeing their jobs exported overseas anyway, because their wages have not been reduced to the level of subsistence wages in Indonesia or China. One cause of low productivity is technological obsolescence. Unwilling to spend their own money to modernize their plants, big companies cry poverty and call for federal funds, supposedly to help them compete against foreign firms. Yet these same companies might then produce huge cash reserves for mergers. For example, after laying off 20,000 workers, refusing to modernize its aging plants, and milking the government of hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies and tax write-offs, U.S. Steel came up with $6.2 billion to purchase Marathon Oil.
Okay, all right. This is a little bit of a lot of sections, a little longer, chapter 2, just so you know, but we'll get through it in a little bit. And so section 6, market demand and productivity. Parenti is not saying that private enterprise can't answer our needs. They could. They just choose not to. People often believe that greed is part of human nature, but then when you ask them if they themselves are greedy, well, the answers vary because people be weird and proud of some nasty shit, but most say they are not. People have been convinced that everyone leans into greed. The only reason greed is ever tapped into more so than not is because the current economic system, that is capitalism in all its forms from laissez-faire to fascism, and even those mixed markets, because it incentivizes greed. If all or even most people were greedy, capitalism would completely fail because there would be much more people willing to exploit people, but very few people left to exploit, and everything would become stagnant. Those spouting free market bullshit believe that if everyone was a capitalist, it would be a utopia. Why is it that people who claim to support capitalism never understand how it functions, let alone even the definition of it? But I digress. Okay. I like this chapter because I can hear Parenti's voice rising in anger about how these third world countries are rich. It's just the people are poor. And that is what America-centric pro-capitalist assholes never get. They don't care to get. They feel safe and remain that way until something happens directly to them. And sometimes even after that, they still don't get it. The dream, no matter how faint it is, of becoming one of the upper crusts is a hard one to give up, I suppose. One of the first communistic concepts I learned was how production under capitalism only serves those with money. Especially in this day and age, we have enough to take care of every last person on Earth's needs. We don't produce to those needs. We produce to the wants of the capitalists. And what do the capitalists want? More wealth for themselves. Oh, okay. I want to bring up this little story because so about a year and a half ago, I was talking on Appalachia, and I happened to say it in the way that Michael Parenti said it in 1991 in the video when he's talking about it, and I have it out there. So someone was like, I'll give him a pass, and I just kind of giggled because I got called out for saying it the way that we do in New England and New York, which is Appalachian, and Appalachia is what we call it, Appalachia. But I'm so used to calling it Appalachia now, that I can't even remember how to say it the other way. So that someone just pointed that out. But You have to remember that mountain range does go through here. So, yeah, we say the term wrong, I guess, locally. So you guys are right. Especially when we're talking about Appalachians, they deserve the correct pronunciation, I guess. So I just want to apologize on behalf of myself and Parenti and all us New Englanders. I went around and asked my family members and some of my friends, like, how they say it. And yeah, we all say Appalachian. No, however they say it. I don't know. I can't even remember anymore because... All right, so Appalachia was devastated by the capitalist focus on industries like coal mining. Not only did the mining destroy the environment, but it left the people living there poor, yet reliant on these labor-intensive, dangerous jobs. Appalachia is rich, and the capitalists extracted that wealth and left the communities high and dry. One of the concessions to people, the people got in the New Deal was the minimum wage, which Rick has just said. It was only last raised in 2009, and I think it was several years in between that before it was raised. So one of the concessions that people got in the New Deal was the minimum wage, which was supposed to raise with the cost of living. That was one of the things in the New Deal that has since been watered down, which once again shows how reforming capitalism with social programs never works. You know what never seems to be taken away? Corporate welfare. Our government will always prop up the industries. So innovation comes from people, and competition actually hurts innovation because it becomes an individualistic thing. And to the victor goes the spoils, am I right? Instead of actually working together and finding the best ways to do things, or say a cure for cancer, it becomes harder. The capitalists make more money off of treating symptoms anyhow than curing people from a disease. So they don't care. Like, they're fine with that. Okay, so let's listen to section 7.
The hardships of working America. In the last decade, the real wages of the poorest fifth of the nation dropped almost 9%, while the consumer debt grew twice as fast as personal income. Meanwhile, personal bankruptcies were at record highs, and the gap between the rich and most other people was wider than at any time since the 1920s. In capitalist societies, if people cannot find work, that is their misfortune. No free market economy has ever come close to full employment. If anything, unemployment is functional to capitalism. Without a reserve army of unemployed to compete for jobs and deflate wages, labor would cut more deeply into profits. In the 2009 recession, the unemployment rate climbed to 9.5%, or almost 15 million people. This figure does not include the millions who had exhausted their unemployment compensation and left the rolls, or part-timers and reduced-time workers who needed full-time jobs, or the unemployed who gave up looking for work after years of frustration. Nor does the official unemployment figure count the many forced into early retirement or who joined the armed forces because they cannot find work, nor prison inmates who had no jobs before incarceration. Were we to count all these groups, the hidden unemployment in the United States was upwards of 20%. The economy had fewer jobs in 2009 than it had in 2000, even though the labor force had grown by some 12 million workers in that time. The number of workers forced to settle for part-time work has more than doubled in recent decades to about 30 million. Of course, some people prefer part-time work because of school or family obligations, but they do not make up the bulk of part-time and sometime employees. The median hourly wage of part-timers was about one-third less than full-time employees in the same occupations. Among the part-timers are millions of contract workers, who are paid only for hours put in while deprived of a regular employment slot. About one-fifth of them, more than 1 million, have returned to their old companies, working at the same jobs but now at lower wage scales, with no health insurance, no paid vacations, and no pension fund. U.S. Labor Department statistics show that only about 35% of laid-off full-time workers end up with equally remunerative or better-paying jobs. In the 2008-2009 recession, after almost a year in the doldrums, stock market prices began to recover, home building picked up, the number of foreclosures leveled off, yet consumer demand was lagging and people were still losing their jobs at a high rate, an indication that the recession might drag on, developing into what is called a jobless recovery, when things get better for those with money and remain bad for those without. Some people say there is plenty of work available. Unemployment happens because individuals are just lazy. But when unemployment jumps by millions during an economic slump, is it really because a mass of people suddenly found work too irksome and preferred to lose their income, medical coverage, and pensions? When jobs do open up, vast numbers of the lazy line up for them. Some examples: at a plant in Iowa, 4,000 people applied for 53 jobs. In New York City, 4,000 people lined up for 700 relatively low-paying hotel jobs. And 24,500 people applied for 325 low-paying jobs at a new Walmart outside Chicago. Wealth and want in the United States. 41. Technological advances and automation can expand productivity while reducing the number of jobs. Indeed, that is the purpose of automation. Another cause of decline in jobs is the runaway shop. U.S. firms move to cheaper third-world labor markets in order to maximize their profits. We hear that the United States is a middle-class nation, but most Americans actually are working class. They labor for hourly wages. Even among white-collar service employees, the great majority are non-managerial and low-wage. Conditions for working people have deteriorated compared to 30 years ago. U.S. workers now have more forced overtime, fewer paid days off, longer work weeks, fewer benefits, less sick leave, and shorter vacations, if any. People are working harder for relatively less, as real wages continue to stagnate or decline and government income supplements are reduced. One report showed that a majority of Americans say they are not living as well as their parents and their earning power is not keeping up with the cost of living. Larger numbers of them report spending at least 1 year in poverty in their lifetimes. The total U.S. consumer debt was $2.5 trillion in 2008 or, if mortgages are included, upwards of $6 trillion. One reason Americans are going deeper into debt is because salaries have not increased enough to meet rising inflation. 40 in the last several decades, the household debt burden has mushroomed to 30% of disposable income. By 2007, some 29 million households were using at least 49% of disposable income to service debt, with a record share of household income being spent to pay interest on accumulated debt. With cutbacks in federal college grants, many students have to borrow more heavily to get an education. At public universities, student borrowers also work at paying jobs an average of over 22 hours a week. In the end, more than 65% of college students leave school heavily in debt. After graduation, students who miss a payment or default on a loan end up, because of compounded usurious interest rates and penalties, owing 3 or 4 times more than they ever received. There are more than 5 million student loans in default. Millions of former students now live in a kind of debtor's prison without walls, as their debts grow faster than they can be paid off and their earnings are garnished for years to come, consigning them to a semi-poverty level. Student debt is the only consumer debt that is denied bankruptcy relief. Not without reason is it described as the most oppressive debt in U.S. history.
Okay, and once again, this book is, this edition, the 9th edition, is 15 years old, and my friend Rick is bringing up that this is what he's talking about here. It doesn't even include the whole push to gig work in the last, I'd say in 10 or so years, in the last 15 years. So remember in an earlier chapter, Parenti brought up Ford calling unemployed people lazy just weeks before he added 75,000 people to that status of unemployed? Yeah, I just felt like this was a good place to remind you all how much of an asshole Ford is. All right. And once again, this edition of the book was put out in 2010, what I was just saying. So the numbers he's talking about are, have gotten worse in the last 15 years. And Rick is bringing up like the gig economy and stuff. Rick, if you want to come up here and talk about that, we have 2 more sections and I can have you come up after that if you want to. This is where I asked the question. I wonder what Parenti would say about the push for child labor again. That was where I was just kind of thinking like, I wish we had him, because I think he would have a lot to say about what's going on right now. I wish he was, still there, but he also gave us a lot. So, it's okay. We heard a lot about student loan debt when Biden promised to hand out, help out. And though some people did benefit, it left others still in massive debt, and nothing was done to fix the problem overall. Yet another half-assed fix to the capitalist system. And we talked about that earlier when I was rehashing Chapter 3 stuff in the New Deal. When he talks about worsening conditions for workers, of which in my working years I even saw and experienced the decline in conditions, I was thinking about the personal analogy I use about just continuing to accept and adjust the crap happening in my body as my progressive disease gets worse. every new or worsening symptom, I just end up having to adjust my life around it. I feel that capitalism is like that worsening disease, and people just keep accepting the worsening conditions because most cannot think beyond the current system. There's a cure for that disease, though, if only most people would stop just accepting its horrible symptoms. And we all know what the cure is. I'll say it, communism. Okay, we'll listen to chapter 8.
42. Poverty in Paradise. As of 2007, the Census Bureau reported 37.3 million people living in poverty in the United States, 12.5% of the population, or 1 out of every 8 Americans. With the recession of 2008 to 2009, the numbers are expected to rise substantially. Official estimates generally understate the poverty problem by excluding many undocumented workers and several million other seriously poor or homeless who go uncounted in the census. Over 70% of the families below the government's official poverty line have a member who is fully employed. They work for a living but not for a living wage. According to an IRS report, the share of overall income received by the bottom 80% of taxpayers fell from 50% to about 40%. Among the working poor are growing numbers of sweatshop workers who put in long hours for below minimum wages, plus female domestics in affluent households who work 12 to 15-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for wages sometimes amounting to as little as $2 an hour. An additional 25 million people in the United States live just above the official poverty line in dire straits. They have no medical insurance, are often unable to afford a doctor, cannot pay utility bills or keep up car payments, and sometimes lack sufficient funds for food. It is not laziness that keeps them down, but the low wages their bosses pay them and the high prices, exorbitant rents, and regressive taxes they face. A recent comprehensive study of low-income workers in America found abuses everywhere, in factories, retail shops, construction sites, offices, warehouses, and private homes. More than a quarter of these workers had been paid less than the minimum wage. Many were forced to work unpaid before or after their shifts. Wages and tips were routinely stolen. Workers were forced to work when sick or injured. Many were denied time off for meals. More than 2/3 had their breaks denied or shortened. Workers who complained to government agencies suffered illegal retaliation, firing, suspension, or pay cuts. 45. The poverty line is purportedly adjusted regularly by the Consumer Price Index to account for inflation. However, for those of modest means, wealth and want in the United States 43. Disproportionately larger part of their income goes to basic necessities such as rent, food, fuel, and medical care. The cost of these necessities rises much more rapidly than the general price index, but the Census Bureau has failed to adjust for this, thereby grossly underestimating the extent of poverty in the nation. Nor do the 40-year-old poverty line measurements reflect the dramatic escalation of medical costs, housing, and the necessity to own a car in many parts of the country. Americans have been taught that they are the most prosperous people in the world. The truth is, the United States is 49th in the world in literacy, and 37th in healthcare, even while spending more on its health industry than any other nation. Of 20 industrial countries, the United States has the highest poverty rate, highest per capita prison population, highest infant mortality rate, and highest rate of youth deaths due to accidents, homicide, and other violence. Americans work longer hours per year and get less vacation time than workers in any other industrialized country. In the Western social democracies, employees get 5 to 6 weeks of paid vacation every year. Americans average 1 to 2 weeks a year, if that. Given the improvement in disease prevention and lifestyle, including more physical exercise and less smoking, U.S. life expectancy reached an all-time high of 77.9 years in 2007. But among the Western democracies, the United States still rates last in life expectancy behind Britain at 78.7. And the U.S. population shows increasingly high rates of hypertension and obesity. The poor pay more for most things. Exorbitant rents in rundown unsafe housing units that slumlords refuse to repair, and installment sales that charge interest rates of 200 to 300%. Fringe banks and check-cashing companies make billions of dollars annually off low-income people by charging fees of up to 10% to cash their paychecks or welfare or social security checks. Predatory lenders make short-term loans at usurious rates to people who run short of cash between paychecks. Many of these storefront loan sharks are funded by major banks and corporations. Their growth has been fueled by a decline in the number of households with bank accounts and an increase in the low-income population. Despite all the talk about affirmative action, African Americans and Latinos endure unemployment and poverty rates about twice as high as that of whites, and continue to suffer racial discrimination in employment and other areas of life. One investigation demonstrated that when whites and African Americans, who were deliberately matched in qualifications, applied for the same jobs, the whites were 3 times more likely to be hired, and less likely to encounter discouragement and slighting treatment. Ethnic minorities are still turned down more often than whites for home mortgages, regardless of income. Women also number among the super-exploited. 2 out of 3 adults in poverty are women, many of them single mothers. Of the more than 58 million females who work, a disproportionately high number are concentrated in low-paying secretarial and service jobs. In the mid-1960s, women averaged 69 cents for every dollar men made. After 30 years of struggle and hard work, they now earn 77 cents for every dollar men receive, even with similar skills and experience. Meanwhile, male wages have themselves declined as higher-paying industrial jobs for male workers are outsourced to other countries.
Okay, let's see. Section 8, Poverty in Paradise. I just want to say on that affirmative action thing that is now gone, that it was white women who actually benefited the most from that, which, whatever. Okay. Looking at the poverty line in the U.S. doesn't give the full picture. Currently, the census is claiming in 2024 that 11.1% of people lived in poverty. However, over 65% of workers have claimed they live paycheck to paycheck. And at any minute with a medical emergency or a car accident or anything that has out-of-pocket costs, any of those over 65% of people could not be having all their needs met. In the few years before I was disabled from the capitalist working system, I struggled constantly with bills. Once I even took a predatory payday loan because I needed to pay some bills, which set me back even more down the line. I think the rate to the payback was it was horrible. I think it was like three times as much as what I borrowed. But at least I had heat in the middle of January in New England, since the cold exasperates my disorder. Many people don't just work 40 hours either. They do overtime or have second and sometimes third jobs. I spent 2 years of my life working 3 jobs, and most of my working years working 2 jobs, like more than half. I worked at least 2 jobs, and was still unable to save a thing, because it was all taken away from me. The thing that they got people thinking America is great, or at what, all right. The thing is, they got people thinking America is great, or was at one time in history, had been great, while we don't even rank close to the top 10 for many factors that measure quality of life. All we got is the propaganda. So that's what they gave us, is propaganda. Okay, so we have section 9, and then this is the last section. And if anyone wants to come up, I'm looking at you, Rick. I like having Rick up on the panel, but anybody else can come up too, so. Let's start listening in chapter 9, and we'll get this going.
The human costs of economic injustice. About 13 million of the nation's children live in poverty, a higher rate than 20 years earlier. Children born into poverty are more likely to be of low birth weight, die in infancy or early childhood, and be plagued with serious ailments, including diseases associated with malnutrition. They are more likely to suffer from untreated illnesses, be exposed to environmental toxins and neighborhood violence, and suffer delays in learning development. Young and elderly poor suffer a silent epidemic of oral disease, from tooth decay to mouth cancer, due largely to poor overall health and inability to pay for dental care or dental insurance. More than 36 million people, including over 12 million children, live in households that go hungry during some part of the month, an increase of 5 million since 1999. Hunger or near hunger in regions all across the United States poses a torrent of needs that food banks and soup kitchens cannot handle. Many recipients are among the working poor, who need emergency food to supplement their insufficient earnings. According to a recent study, 1 in 6 young children face a constant threat of food insecurity and do not have adequate access to healthy food. A 2007 UNICEF report ranked the United States as the worst place to be a child among 21 industrialized nations. The Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Spain were listed as the best. The categories studied were health and safety, family cohesion, risk of poverty, risk of alcoholism and drugs, and the like. In major American cities and small towns, indigents pick food out of garbage cans and dumps. As one columnist noted, If the president on his visit to China had witnessed Chinese peasants eating from garbage cans, he almost certainly would have cited it as proof that communism doesn't work. What does it prove when it happens in the capitalist success called America? 57. Millions of working poor are only a paycheck away from the streets. Over 95 million people, one-third of the nation, experience housing hardships. Housing is the largest single expenditure for many low-income families, consuming 60 to 70% of their income. Due to realty speculations, gentrification, condominium conversions, unemployment, low wages, and abolition of rent control, people of modest means have been squeezed out of the housing market in greater numbers than ever. Over 2 million affordable housing units have vanished during the last 25 years, forcing more and more families to double and triple up, imposing hardships and severe strains on domestic relations. Whole families sleep in cars or abandoned buildings, in tent cities, and in temporary shelters. The 2009 recession brought a sharp increase in homelessness and in the number of babies being born in shelters, along with a drastic increase in food shortages. Wealth and want in the United States. 45. Several million Americans are homeless at some point during an average year, almost a third of whom are families with children. Homelessness offers a life of stress, hunger, filth, destitution, loneliness, exhaustion, mental depression, and unattended illness. Many persons who stay in homeless shelters or makeshift street shelters hold full-time jobs. With rents so high and pay so low, and jobs disappearing during economic decline, they cannot afford a place to live. Most cities do not provide sufficient affordable shelter or food for their homeless populations. Instead, they increasingly apply the criminal justice system to punish those who try to survive on the streets. Authorities prohibit panhandling, selectively enforce laws against loitering, and enact legislation making it illegal to sleep, sit, or store personal belongings in public spaces. Almost half the people who live in poverty are over 65. Despite Medicare assistance, the elderly face the highest out-of-pocket health care costs. About half of all seniors have returned to work or are looking for work because they cannot subsist on their savings and pensions. Less than half of private sector workers have any kind of private pension or retirement savings such as a 401. Corporations often treat worker pension funds as part of a firm's assets. They sometimes default on private pension payments, failing to set aside sufficient sums to pay workers the benefits they are owed. Also, if the corporation merges with another or is bought out, the fund is absorbed by the takeover and the workers may not see a penny of the money they paid into it. In 2001 alone, $175 billion in workers' 401 savings were lost or stolen by management. If nothing is done, the entire private pension system could eventually collapse under the plunder. In fact, many such private pensions did shrink away when stock values crashed in 2008. It is difficult for those who have never known serious economic want to imagine the misery it can cause. People living under the crushing burden of poverty, without enough money for rent, food, and other necessities, in unsafe crime-ridden neighborhoods and deteriorated housing, suffer an inordinate amount of unattended pathologies. Drops in income and even modest jumps in unemployment rates bring discernible increases in depression, high blood pressure, emotional distress, substance abuse, suicide, and crime. Tens of millions are addicted to alcohol, tobacco, or illegal drugs. Millions more are addicted to medical drugs such as amphetamines and barbiturates. The pushers are the doctors, the suppliers are the drug industry, the profits are stupendous. Each year, 30,000 Americans on average take their own lives. Another 17,000 or so are murdered. The number of young people who kill themselves has tripled since the 1950s. Millions of U.S. women are battered by men. Almost 5 million sustain serious injury each year. Over 2 million children, mostly from lower-income families, are battered, abused, abandoned, or seriously neglected each year. Many elderly also are subjected to serious abuse, which, like child abuse, increases dramatically when economic conditions worsen. The recession of 2008-2009 only intensified the plight of low and middle-income people. For almost 30 years there had been a growing gap between rising productivity and stagnant real wages. This brought an immense increase in corporate profits for the super-rich. As one economist noted, part of this wealth was lent back to working people to finance their homes, cars, medical care, education, and daily expenses. And part of the wealth was invested in the unproductive, speculative, financial sector, resulting in still more business and industrial overcapacity, corporate failures, unemployment, and overall economic instability. In sum, the story of the United States' great affluence has a grim side. The free market is very good for winners, offering all the rewards that money can buy, but it is exceedingly harsh on millions of others. Contrary to the prevailing social mythology, the U.S. capitalist system squanders our natural resources, exploits and underpays our labor, and creates privation and desperate social needs amidst commodity glut, serving the few at great cost to the many, leaving us with a society that is less democratic and increasingly riven by wealth and want. Ter.
Okay. All right. I just got a restriction. I don't know what's going on. Probably something Parenti said. Maybe something I said. I don't know. All right. So Rick is coming up. Let me put on my headphones. Come on. It takes me forever to get you up here, Rick. Sorry. Okay. So slow.
If there were no technical difficulties, it wouldn't be about Parenti.
No, you have to have the technical difficulties. Let me just get through my notes. It'll just take me a minute. So for section 9, first of all, I wanted to mention where he said like Sweden's one of the highest now. Sweden's actually dropped to like 20th position now. They're actually not doing as well as they had been doing. So they are on the decline right now in their sock demery. Also, while Rick's here, I want to say to you, Rick, you had said to me, why do you have the Irish voice going for Parenti, who's Italian? And then I just realized I did a little intro for my Parenti stuff to put up on YouTube and Spotify. So I'm putting these up on those things. And I chose I usually use a little bit of my husband's music, and I chose the intro from Irish Catholic Blues. Why am I? I don't know. The Irish stuff in Parenti is just, and he'd probably be like, yeah, no, I'm Italian. He talks about being Italian all the time too.
Yeah, he's like. He's still like, he's not just like sort of Italian.
He's very Italian, he's I know.
Culturally Italian.
He's extremely Italian,
like
I know.
He's not just like a random white guy. He's like very much Italian.
And I keep using the Irish stuff. Yeah. All right, so let me just get through my notes. So, anti-communists love to throw around some bogus numbers of how many people died because of communism and never actually look at the numbers under capitalism. Once you start digging in, it truly gets gnarly. I figured I want to bring back the word gnarly from the 80s. Throughout, or I guess that's surfer. Do the surfers still use it? I don't know. Throughout my comments on the reading in this chapter, I have relayed some personal stories on what happened to me suffering from a progressive disorder as a worker in America. One thing I didn't mention was the times, there were 2, that I was homeless, and both happened while I was still working. One was relatively a short time, and I was able to couch surf through it. And the second one lasted over 6 months. At first, I spent that time rotating through a few state park campgrounds because you could only stay 2 weeks at a time. One was, the other one that I had to go to was like so far away from my work. It took me like over an hour to get to work every day, which cost me more in gas and stuff like that. So, when the park, I'm in Massachusetts, so the park's closed for camping for the season. And so I had to spend the next 3 months. I had a van. My parents had given me an old Econoline that they had. So I was basically living in that, or every once in a while I'd surf on people's couches again. Still to this day, I'm thankful for...
What year was the Econoline? No, I need to know what year, because I also lived in an Econoline for a while.
Let me think. I think it was like late 90s. Maybe mid 90s. Okay. It might have been mid 90s.
I lived in mine was a 79.
Oh, yeah. No. They got
on the floor, stick shift. No, they got way worse in the 80s. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, this wasn't a stick shift. This was automatic. I'm telling you, because we had the one red van, and then we had my uncle's blue van, and then my parents loved doing traveling. They loved, we went cross country in the van when I was like 6. It was, so I've been in like a lot of states and everything. But like I was a kid. So we had like one van that had my dad put Mickey Mouse flooring down on it. And because we were just kids, and then we got the other one. So now I'm thinking it was early 90s, actually, because I got the van in 2000. So they would have had it for about 10 years, I guess. So it was probably, it was a good size, though. It was a little comfy. My dad made a couch in it.
There you go.
So many people in the country suffer much worse fates than I did, though. And for those who lack compassion, their first thoughts go to get a job. When they find out many unhoused people in the United States actually do work and many others are suffering from disabilities, they just don't care and they believe it could never happen to them. And we have seen how struggling people on the streets are treated. When folks try to feed them, they get arrested and fined. When the governor wants to clean up his city, he'll show up and help rip down the tents and steal and dispose of the possessions of the unhoused. The capitalist system has no way to cure this, as it is a symptom of that disease and an acceptable one for the capitalists, as long as they don't have to look upon it. Even in the Nordic SOCDEM countries, privatization has been taking hold, especially in healthcare and education, and the inequality in those countries are growing, especially in Sweden. The top 10% of the country own up to 60 to 70% of the wealth. They have been cutting taxes and social programs. There is still a significant pay gap between men and women, though not as significant as here, as women are paid 90 cents to the men's dollar. They have fascists in their government in the party called Sweden Democrats. So, as I have said and will continue to say, you cannot reform capitalism into something that is good for anyone but the actual capitalists. The privatization fascists love so much will always be leaned into and strengthened the worst aspects of capitalism. All right, that's all I had to say on that. So, what's going on, Rick?
Hey, so I was watching a thing earlier, and they were talking about just like economics as a field. And one of the ways that they cover up poverty is by using the concept of the average. And so like when they're doing economic models, they're usually looking for like an improvement of the average person, which presumes that there's no inequality. Like if you take an average and that's the thing that you're running your model off of, then you're automatically ignoring inequality, right? Because that's what taking an average just like flattens all the inequality out of the system entirely. And I think it's interesting because people have this idea that like in the United States that people are wealthy because there are wealthy people here. Like the wealthiest people in the world live in the U.S. Not entirely, but like for the most part, that's like where they spend their time. And I think it's interesting that like I also like to say that I think that some of the poorest people in the world also live in the United States. And I say that because they're like you're saying, like they got rid of all these social programs. Like you were talking about, like even since like you were living in a van, like those public parks or those national park lands where you can stay for 2 weeks at a time at the campground for free. Those have mostly gone away. You have to pay for those now. And also, not only do you have to pay for them, but like the park rangers and like all the upkeep of the park is being eliminated. And it seems obvious that that's being eliminated in order to like sell those public lands as well. And as you have less and less public space to exist in, more and more of being homeless is just illegal. And like we're seeing that like things like public camping bans entirely, where like you can't be caught sleeping in public or you will be, sent into the prison system. And
I did have to pay a little bit. I did pay like, it was a small amount, like $15 a week or something, staying there at that time. But I'm sure I know that the prices went way up after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times it's like entry fees, this $15, which is wild to think about, like having to pay entry fees.
Yeah. definitely. I mean, if it's a state park, I live in the state. Proletariat, I was thinking about that with like the narcoleptic people and stuff, like, you know what I mean? Like, used to have like guys in malls falling asleep while their wives were shopping, on benches. So are they just going to start picking everyone up? I don't know.
No, they're going to apply it in a way that like in like racial and class based ways.
Course.
Like they're not going to.
I know.
Depends on, do you look poor? Like that's really what it comes down to. It's like, how poor do you look? And yeah, that's, I don't know. It really, like, while we're sending people off to like concentration camps halfway across the world, it's just like, it makes me wonder like how far they're going to be willing to go with that, because as this new recession, depression, we'll see what happens and the economy takes hold, there's going to be an increase in homelessness, and there's going to have to be a political response to that.
Yeah.
And because we have fascist leadership, there's only really one political response to that, and that's repression.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just see that coming down the line, and like all the things he's talking about, he's like describing like the fallout from the last recession, and so many people haven't even actually truly recovered from that.
No.
Right? Like I don't feel like I feel like maybe, like just barely, feel like we're like almost back to the point where and then like it crashes again and just keeps doing that. That happened with COVID, and now like the cycles are getting tighter.
Yeah.
It's interesting him talking about also like he was talking about like, if somebody was eating out of a trash can in China, it would be considered like a failure of their communist regime. And it's just like, yeah, that was a thing that was happening in 2010 in China, and now it's like not really anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's even harder to make the case, and that makes me wonder too, like how the U.S. plans to maintain the image. I think it's losing that. It's losing that ability. And along with that is going to go so many other things. Like, I think that the fact where there's brain drain from all these third world countries where they take like all the free education that people are given, and those people come to the U.S. to make money, I think that's going away.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you could just randomly be deported because you say the wrong thing, like, why risk it? Like, why risk going to school here even? It's
weird, though, with like, because Elon wants those people, for him, because he makes money off them. So I don't know how that's going to play out with tech. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're absolutely right on like, I don't think people are going to want to come here. And did you see that the EU has been made some moves to separate from the US? I think that was yesterday or the day before that they like kind of put something out like US bad. So they're like they are seeing it. Let me look it up because
I think it was I don't know if it was president or prime minister. I don't know enough about Spanish politics, but the leader of Spain was on like a long trip to China recently where they like cut a bunch of deals and was talking about like the connections between Europe and China and deepening them, and like deepening the connections between China and Spain in particular. And Spain being, like one of the major ports or the area with ports that Chinese goods come in. It's it seems like the whole thing of like the U.S. and its allies is going to be more and more just the U.S. And so like I guess like people will just like move on from it.
Yeah,
empires kind of fall away to the wayside.
Yeah, they'll move towards. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, so when it was happening, because it basically went from, England to us, you know what I mean? So England was seeing a lot of that. It's just interesting when it was happening to England, though, because it was in industrialization still, where they started falling out. So I don't know.
And the system was more or less identical when empire transferred from England, the UK to the United States. It was more of a seamless transition, whereas
this one's not going to be.
There is no clear China is a powerful country for sure, but it's not the only center of power in the world, and it's not the only alternative system to the U.S. You see other kinds of fascism, like what's happening in India or Russia or Brazil, is having there's a whole alternative in Latin America of social democracy towards a more socialist thing, but not really fully repudiating capitalism. We're seeing that as an option.
Do you think we're going to go? Are we going to go through Do you think we're going to go through a soc dem hegemonic thing for a little bit? Is that what you're thinking with the Latin America kind of moving that way, or?
I mean, it seems right now, I feel if you're not interested in adopting what is essentially the Chinese model, the only other model that's out there is that, right? It's what's going on in Mexico, and Peru, Colombia. We're seeing that sort of model. And honestly, it's hard to tell because some of the things that they're doing, you're are they just telling people they're social democrats and just doing the communist thing? Because they're renationalizing industries in Mexico. That is happening. And doing redistribution programs and cutting capital deals. But it's certainly moving a direction. And I don't think that Latin America doesn't have the same sort of imperialist baggage or the same sort of, not to say that they don't have issues with imperialism of the past and being victims of it mostly, but they have a different relationship to imperialism than European social democracies have. And the problem with social democracy in Latin America has mostly been that any attempt at it was overthrown by the CIA and the U.S. security state in general, and trade wars and things like that. We see what the U.S. did to Chile when they tried it, what they've done to Venezuela, right? We've seen that happen. But as the U.S. becomes weaker and unable to pull that off, who's to say how well it will work or not work, to move towards a socialist system through social democracy in Latin America? I don't think is necessarily the same. Won't necessarily have the same sort of contradictions and issues that they have in Europe. Yeah, I can see why they are a little bit more tepid about moving towards socialism too, because the reaction. Even in Mexico, we see cartel killings that are almost certainly CIA projects. Going after the social democrats there. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because they can't trust their neighbor. I had that. I made a graphic one time, and I was using the State Farm line of a good neighbor, and I just had just everything. Every part that the U.S. had done a coup in the world just light up. In this time with the a good neighbor, the United States was there. So yeah, it's interesting because I think that I understood to this point. I understood we were going to get to this point, and that was kind of inevitable. But I don't know if I know what's coming next. I'm trying to look at everything, and I'm I don't know what's going to happen here. And I don't know how it feels like it's happening fast, but then it gets stretched out. So I don't know. It's weird. I'm not shook on what Trump's doing. I was actually kind of surprised he didn't do some more of this, 4 years ago, or 8 years ago. But I don't know.
When he was in power last time, I mean, he did do a lot of this, just not to the same degree. He did tariffs, but not to the same degree. Like he did, mass deportation, but not to the same degree. So I think we might have been better off just having him from 2020 to 24 and be done in 24, because I think that 4-year break is where everyone got into his ears, the more the tech bros and the other billionaires, and kind of guiding Trump to what they wanted to, I think the big change there was the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
The Heritage Foundation, the first time around wasn't really that. Trump wasn't their guy in the primaries, and so they were kind of caught off guard. Whereas this time they knew it was going to be Trump, and so they got all of their guys. They got way more of their guys in than the first time around. They had some people in his administration, but now it's completely chock full of these Heritage Foundation guys. And so finally the neoliberals get to do exactly what they wanted to do since Reagan. They just want to marketize everything. They want to do a trade war. They want to do privatizing the national parks. They want to eliminate labor laws. They want to eliminate everybody, all that
education. They don't want education. They don't want I mean, they're just going to get, it's just weird. It's just weird to me. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It's I understand the fascism that's in our system and how easy it's for them to do this stuff, and I still can't. What I can't understand is people not seeing it. People still people getting up in those lives with Ash and you and being well, capitalism's good, and they're not even capitalists, and they don't how are you not seeing any of this stuff? I don't understand.
Well, it's a lot of it is also the mindset thing. People don't want to say the system is bad because it's if you're playing a game and you're losing and you say that oh man, these rules are messed up, they're biased against me, and it's okay, they don't want to seem like they're just sore losers about it. And they're no, I'm just gonna have to build a better strategy or whatever. And that's the thing is that's the way they see the critique of capitalism. They're oh, you're just a sore loser in the game. And it's okay, even if that's true, some games are shitty. Yeah. Some games actually are biased. I saw there's creator here does a lot of animation stuff, and she described it as if there was a game show, and the rule of the game show is every round anybody named Michael gets 100 points, right? And you have people suggest that they want to change the rules of the game. The person whose name is Michael is well, I earned all of the points that I got according to the rules of the game. And it's well, yeah, he did. That's actually true. He did win all the points based on the rules of the game.
The game is stacked.
That the game shouldn't be critiqued, right?
Yes.
It's very much it's very silly to be no, I earned it. It's well, yeah, technically you did.
Well, it's Parenti was talking in there. He's saying in the inherited all right, so you're going to say you didn't inherit money, but you inherited your parents were able to pay for you to go to college, or you just had good contacts. You made, you were in places where you could, get a good contact to someone that could, help you out, personally. And that's just luck. A lot of what happens is luck too. It's not earning. They didn't do anything actually, but they just get handed it because they got the luck of it, the luck of the draw, I guess.
Yeah, all the real money I ever made in my life was because of luck.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. It was just knowing the right people, being the right kind of person in the right kind of place, like because of things like systemic racism and misogyny and stuff, like another person wouldn't have had the same opportunities as I did. It's, that's the case. It really does come down to like the luck of the draw.
Yeah. It's like how I wore low cut shirts and when I got pulled over, I'd never get a ticket. Thinking. Oh, but that wasn't luck. I guess, I'm a woman, so I was given that.
You worked hard for that.
I worked so hard. But yeah, no, I mean it's I wish people would just admit, like, that you got lucky there. That you had some privilege. That, you knew the right person, or that person has, had the luck and then they knew you and they helped you out, like it's just not everybody can have that. And not everybody can be a capitalist because that's not how capitalism works. No matter how much the free marketers want to like say, oh, everyone could just own a business.
There's this psych study they did where like they have people play Monopoly and like if they have one person at the beginning of the Monopoly game, they give them like 4 or 5 times as much out of the bank at the beginning, right? You get way more money to start with. And then like when they win pretty much every time. And not only like are they winning, but like they have like snacks set out and the people who are winning, they like eat more of the snacks than the other people like consistently, which is kind of funny. But like on top of that, they interview them after. They ask like, why did you win? And they ask all the losing players, they're like, why did they win? And it's like, well, because they got twice as much money to start. But the winning players never mention that. They always talk about like the decisions they made in the game. They're like, well, I chose to buy this thing and that was like a good thing. And like, oh, I traded this for that. And that was like a good trade. And that gave me, all 4 railroads. And I got to, like that's, they never ever cite the thing. And it's like, that's actually is like a psychological effect. Nobody wants to admit when they were given a leg up. And that's why like so many of the people who defend capitalism really are just that. It's just people who like had a huge leg up and they don't want to admit it.
Yeah. I mean, I had a decent sized leg up.
The system is rigged is to admit.
I was just saying, like, I had a decent leg up. I mean, not a great one, but like, I was when they were still kind of middle class, you know what I mean? Like my parents were doing okay. Like, and what you said about the recession, people haven't recovered. I'm living in my house I grew up in, caregiving for my father now. 30 days after he passes, I won't have a place to live because this is in reverse mortgage. Because of all their money being just wiped out in 2009. So,
that happened to my cousins. They ended up in like a financial assisted housing, like Section 8 or something like that after my uncle died because and they weren't even anticipating that. It was the cost of hospice. He like went into hospice. So they thought it would be a couple of days, and he was there for 2 months, and it cost them like thousands and thousands of dollars. They had to sell the house to cover the costs. So there was nothing left, and like they were living there. She was like living there, not only living there, but like getting extra Social Security checks to take care of her dad, like that, like my uncle. And yeah, she was almost homeless, and they had to. Like her and her son had to move. They just barely, I think they were actually in their cars for like a couple of weeks in between. And a lot of people end up in that situation. It is just like
And it's sad because it's people who are disabled.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
And it's usually people who are disabled that get hit the most with this stuff because especially in this country, because of our joke of I can't even call it healthcare.
Like, right. Medical services.
Yes.
it's like more so what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, and this is the thing is like they counted on for capitalism to continue, you kind of have to have this like cycle of inheritance where people like continue on with their businesses and like stuff when people die, right? They're supposed to have, like, because of like how much stuff is in debt and also like the medical costs and end of life costs, almost nobody, like millennials are not going to inherit the boomers' wealth. Gen X is not going to inherit anything. Like they didn't inherit anything from like they're mostly silent gen parents. Like for the most part, that wealth is not going to transfer on to the vast majority of people. It's all going to go to whoever is holding the mass share of like those healthcare companies and a handful of like other places.
Yeah.
Insurance companies and banks, right? And like that's where it's going to go. And I don't know how they're going to maintain, like if they move manufacturing back to the US, like who's going to pay for the goods? Because like nobody has any fucking money. No.
I mean, because and it's funny because like that's I don't know if he I don't even think he talked about that, like when they're talking about people working in China and so then they put them over in like China, Indonesia, whatever. Like they put the business there. Their cost of living is less too. You know what I mean? So our cost of living is so high. And if we're not, if we're working these jobs at these low wages, they'd have to drop all, like, they're just not going to be making their money the way they've been making their money since neoliberalism happened, since they started moving outside of the country and stuff.
Well, the housing costs are like enough to make the wages too high to make it viable.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in China, they can provide a standard of living that is similar to the working class in the US or like maybe closer to like Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They have this like same standard of living, but that's because they don't have to pay for rent, right? Like their costs, even with their lower salaries, their costs for housing are like 10% of their income, 15% of their income, whereas in the US is 50%.
Oh yeah.
And so if you want your employees to have a house, and this is the thing, the only way that they're going to be able to bring it back is if they bring back company towns or use prison labor. Mm-hmm. That's the only way that they could possibly bring back manufacturing, because for Americans to be able to afford any of the housing, they're not going to be able to do that on factory wages.
What do you think about
on factory wages that are cost competitive?
So what do you think about BlackRock buying up housing, Zillow buying up housing? I mean, the second I heard about that, I was thinking company towns. I go, they're doing this they're going to sell it to a corporation like these places, and the corporation is going to use it as like a company town.
Well, I think that it doesn't even necessarily have to get to that to do it, because a lot of these places they're just buying it because the AI tells them to buy it.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's really why they're buying it. And the AI is telling them to buy it because they're basing off historical data. Right. And so like they know that like if you buy real estate, you're going to make your money back because people have to have a place to live. Like it's a safe investment in that sense. And historically it has been, like historically the prices go up. And the thing is, you don't have to have somebody living in a place to make money off of the real estate. That's the real clincher there, is that they're buying and selling real estate. To them, it's no different than it's like an NFT or Bitcoin or anything else. It's just a speculative asset. Right? Yeah. As long as there's somebody else who wants to buy that real estate for more money than they paid for it, they're golden. It's a question that then becomes like, when does the Ponzi scheme fall, right? When does it like when does it go up? When does it fall apart?
True.
And
I just need to address something in the
at this point they've gotten.
I just want to say, like, I'm sorry, CT and McCombs, that you went through that with your relatives. Sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
But yeah, like if the thing is, they're bringing in foreign investors into the game, and so as long as they have somebody willing to buy it, and this is the other area. This is like the other thing that's been propping up the real estate market is Chinese investors buying American real estate, right?
Yeah,
not just Chinese, like people from all over the world do. Australians and people from Saudi Arabia are like way up there in like real estate purchases. But like this is the thing, is like the question then becomes like, how long can they keep selling off that real estate to other people? Like the parking spaces in Chicago are owned by a company in Australia, right? It's like some hedge fund or whatever, right?
Oh, God.
And like that'll be that way as long as like the Australian economy is okay. And so it really then becomes like, how long can they keep this game going with new investors? As long as people are willing to do that, as long as other places keep developing, they'll be able to keep doing that without necessarily having anybody living in them at all, which is the scary part, right? Because we're already at that point. I mean, there's 30 million homes that are just empty.
Yeah.
But they're still worth something, right? Even though no one lives in them.
Yeah.
Like they're worth something as far as like the price is concerned, but the value to humanity is useless because nobody is a house and nobody lives in it. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
My guess is that they're going to go more and more towards prison labor. Like the U.S. has always had slavery to some degree, and I think they're just going to turn the knob up. In fact, they have increased prison labor dramatically since the 70s.
Oh, definitely. They've definitely done more.
Slow down.
Which is kind of like, so then there's the contradiction of like him saying, oh, we're going to send homegrowns out of the country now. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, wouldn't you want that labor? But I don't know. Did you hear that whole thing? Well, homegrowns. Hey, commie trucker.
Yeah, the homegrowns. No, but like the thing is, they want a return on the money. That's all they want. And if they're invested in that prison system in El Salvador, they'll still make a return on the money regardless of where it is. It doesn't really matter. And then they could ship the goods back here if they need consumers. But the thing is, like, so much of their wealth is caught up in stuff that has no basis in like the actual consumer market anymore, that it's hard to like, if American workers go on strike, things still get made because nothing's made here.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the other thing I think they don't realize is like, if they bring manufacturing back, unions will follow because people aren't going to put up with the bullshit, and they'll have the labor power, because the manufacturing that is left is mostly still unionized, right? Or a bunch of it is. And the stuff that isn't is still like paid relatively high comparatively. And so if they want to like bring it back and like inflate away the purchasing power so that like they are paying essentially the same, they're not going to be able to pull that off. People will have a reaction to that because we don't have those social safety nets. People put it up with it in other places because conditions were improving. Like, that's the thing, is like, like there was a time in China where there was a lot of child labor, and there's like a lot of, like sweatshops and all of this stuff. But the time immediately preceding that, people were so poor that they couldn't afford to eat meat. Like they could like meat was something you eat on a holiday, right? Like, they couldn't like afford like clothes more than once every couple of years, right? Like this is like where they were at. And so like they went into the sweatshops because it would have allowed them to improve their lives. But like putting people into that kind of labor as their standard of living is decreasing is totally different. Like that's a totally different thing. Like people are not going to put up with it because they're expecting a certain standard of living.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's where all these people that like don't get it, you know what I mean, are just going to be like, what? This is so wrong. How can this happen to me? And you know, I hope that, you know, more people start opening their eyes. I really do.
There's a few manufacturing plants where I live. There's a one that makes hats. There's a horrifying place that makes plywood. Where I've heard people talk about like it gets so hot there that their hard hats were melting.
Oh,
like the plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. Yeah, no, it's like the thing is, it's like it's cold here most of the time, and so they don't have to worry about like, you know, air conditioning most of the year. So they just don't have it in the summertime, and it's like a literal furnace where they like make plywood, like gluing it and like baking it or whatever. It's fucking nuts. There's another like plastics company, and then there's like a aluminum like machine shop thing. I don't know if foundry is the right word, but like they like machine aluminum parts or some shit like that.
Yeah.
And those wages aren't going up, and they're not that high to begin with. Like the last time I checked, the hat factory pays $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Right. And like the aluminum foundry pays like 16, 15 to do like grinding work with like an industrial, like where you could like easily like lose limbs and stuff, like that kind of work.
Yeah.
17 if you work overnight. Big money. Big
wow.
And the thing is, like the rental costs have gone here like almost caught up to the city. Like they're not like rural cheap rental costs, and all of the other costs are like, you know, the food cost especially is like increasing. And so if the cost of living is increasing and they're not getting any raises, they're basically being pushed into the position that a lot of these people in the sweatshop conditions in places like Indonesia and Bangladesh are living in, where it's just like they have less and less money. And it's the housing crisis is starting to hit rural America is kind of my point, is that like a lot of these people, when I first moved up here, you could buy a house. We did buy a house I bought mine for 17,000. We bought another one for like 10,000 and another one for like 12,000. Like talking 2-3 bedroom houses. Cheap fucking houses. And now they're all, you know, in like the 40 to 80 range, which is still really cheap by national standards. By getting a house for like 50 grand is kind of unheard of in a lot of the country, but it's like, like 50 grand on $10 an hour is still too much, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it's not like that's more than you can afford. Right?
When
like a lot of places won't give loans for that little, right? Like getting a home loan for like less than $100,000 is kind of hard actually. And so like, people are like, it's the first time ever that people are having problems finding homes, because the other thing that happened is that because there is a tourist season, a lot of people have turned their like what used to be the cheap apartments into things like Airbnbs.
Yeah.
And so the Airbnb craze has finally hit like the rural part of the country, or at least places where they have like tourist attractions some of the year. And now the locals they have nowhere to live. Like there's a motel that like used to house like the occasional person who was homeless here. Usually people who were like just let out of jail were the only people living there. It's packed up full now, you know?
Yeah.
It used to be like, there's like one guy who's like lives there for like a couple of months or whatever. And now there's like one or two of them that are like packed full of people living in the motel that are getting like stipends from the county or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's getting worse and worse. You know, like having homelessness in rural America is like not
even
really
noticeable.
I mean, it was a thing, but like,
yeah. In the late 90s, I was working and living down in the Cape Cod, and that's just big tourist, right? A lot like that is really where people who were the workers I mean, they already couldn't afford a lot, but like the housing started like the housing that they could afford to stay in, the rents and everything were going way up because, I don't know, they just could get more money. So like you have this big tourist area and the people that work there can't even afford to live there, So it was just ridiculous. Right.
So like there's an island near me. Okay, so like the Great Lakes have a bunch of islands actually, and they're mostly like resorts, right? Like there's like a bunch of different resorts, and sometimes it's like a national park that still has like resorts on the island or whatever. And it's seasonal work, right? Like they're not open for even most of the summer, right? It's like Memorial Day to Labor Day. That's like when they're open. And one of the islands, there's like a famous one, Mackinac Island, like in between Lake Michigan and Huron. Mm-hmm. They, over the years, kind of got a lot of flack for bringing in Jamaican workers because it looks really bad. It's a very, very white place, and all of the help is black. And they're all Jamaican, and they've been like shipped in there from the Caribbean. Yeah. And it was like, there's like a lot of articles. There's a lot of, it's like people are like uncomfortable. It's like, it gets weirder as time goes on, as people are like more like knowledgeable about like the implications of it. Mm-hmm. And like, it's still happening. Well, but the islands near me in Wisconsin have avoided that by importing Bulgarians and Ukrainians to come and work. So like they're still bringing in foreign temp workers, and now it's like this thing where like that's the locals can't even afford to work on the islands because the transport to and from the island would be like most of their day's wage. Yeah. And so you have to be able to live on the island. Yeah. But because real estate is so expensive on the island, the workers can't afford to live there. Yeah. And so they like end up they're basically like they're company towns, right? Yeah. Like you live and work at the same place and you stay on, and it's a fucking island.
That's where
times, like you don't even speak the language that well.
That's where Obama lives on Martha's Vineyard. They do the same thing. That's right off the Cape, Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. Even places in the Cape, they do the same thing. They've been bringing in like having people come for like the 5 to 6 months that they need the workers, and they're all from like the islands and stuff like that. They're not they're not people that live there that were living there, working there. They no longer could afford living there. So yep, that's what Obama has his house on Martha's Vineyard, and that's what they do there. So all right. I've been on for 2.5 hours, Rick. I'm getting tired. Plus, I also took my medicinal stuff, so things will get funky in a bit if I keep staying on. That's I don't know if Commie Trucker's still here, but
no 12-hour shifts in the content mines.
when Commie Trucker and I we would do our little podcast, that was the thing. He wanted to keep it to an hour, So I was like, all right before we start, I'll take my medicine and it will hit in an hour. And so he could always see if we were going just over the hour, my cheeks would get all red and I'd just start getting glazy eyes. And he's like, well, it's time to call it.
Word.
So, yeah.
I think we'll get lumpy in a minute. That's what Richard says in the comments. All right. Have a good night, Lumpy.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thursday night, 7:00. We will I will be doing this all over again with chapter 5. So come back. Bye.